Hürtgen Forest, February 1945. The front is quiet, too quiet. The trees stand like black needles against a sky without stars. Mud sucks at boots. Every sound, from a twig snap to a cough, could mean death. For months, the U.S. Army has learned the same lesson the hard way. The night belongs to the Germans. In that silence, a single rifleman kneels in the dark, Sergeant Daniel Keene, 26 years old, 2nd Armored Division, eyes pressed to a strange glowing scope mounted on his M1 carbine. A cable runs from the sight to a battery pack strapped to his chest, humming faintly like an insect trapped in metal. It's heavy, clumsy, experimental, and no one but him believes it will work. He breathes through his nose, slow and shallow. 100 yards ahead, a German sentry lights a cigarette behind a fallen tree. The ember glows bright in the rain, an orange pinpoint in the void. To the human eye, that's all there is, blackness and a spark. But through Keene's lens, the world isn't black. It's green. The infrared beam, invisible to the naked eye, bathes the forest in a spectral light. Branches shimmer. Rain falls like threads of silver. The German's outline glows faintly, the cigarette now a beacon of death. Keene tightens his jaw, adjusts the focus, and pulls the trigger. There's no muzzle flash, no noise but the carbine's soft crack swallowed by rain. The sentry drops instantly, the cigarette vanishing in mud. The forest stays silent. The patrol doesn't even look back. Keene exhales, watching the scope flicker. The tube hums like it's alive, draining power with every heartbeat. He lifts his head, scanning the darkness beyond the lens. To the naked eye, there's nothing, just darkness, wet leaves, distant thunder. But he knows what the Germans don't. They're being watched by something they can't see. Behind him, his spotter whispers, "Jesus, Dan, how'd you even see him?" Keene doesn't answer. He only taps the black lens housing, its faint green light reflecting in his eyes. "He was standing in daylight," he mutters. The squad doesn't move for another 5 minutes. The silence feels heavier now. Not from fear, but from realization. For the first time since the war began, the Americans have stolen something the Germans thought they owned, the night. Miles away, command will never hear about it. The prototype isn't supposed to exist. The project is buried under classification and theory. But here, in a frozen forest where men die for yards of mud, one lens has just rewritten the rules of survival. The night is no longer German. It just became American. For most of the war, darkness was German territory. Allied troops learned to fear it, to freeze at the sound of boots in the black. The Wehrmacht moved like phantoms, disciplined, silent, deadly. Their patrols struck and vanished before dawn. Their artillery found its marks by sound alone. And when the moon was bright, German snipers used it like daylight. The Americans called it the Gray Terror. In 1944, if you asked any U.S. infantryman who ruled the night, the answer came fast: the Krauts. They had better optics, better training, and a doctrine that treated the night not as an obstacle, but as a weapon. German engineers had built the first night fighting scopes, the Zielgerät 1229 Vampire, an infrared monstrosity mounted on assault rifles. It was heavy and fragile, but it worked. Allied soldiers called it the vampire gun, the rifle that could see souls. The Americans, by contrast, fought blind. Their doctrine was daylight, their logistics, their bombers, their tanks, all built around the sun. The darkness was the enemy's ally. In Normandy, in the Hürtgen, in the Ardennes, the pattern repeated. By day, the U.S. advanced. By night, the Germans counterattacked. Entire platoons vanished under the cover of fog and shadow. The 28th Infantry Division lost 2,200 men in 3 days. Many never even saw who shot them. It bred a quiet superstition among the GIs. You could be the best shot in your company, but at night you were a target with no aim. The only defense was a foxhole and prayer, until Sergeant Keene broke the pattern. When word of his first invisible shot spread through the company, the reaction wasn't belief, it was mockery. Some said he was lucky, others said he'd imagined it. Infrared sounded like witchcraft. The idea that light could be seen but not seen, that was science fiction, not soldiering. But the Army had already been trying to turn that fiction into fact. Hidden in warehouses and laboratories from Maryland to California, scientists had been building something they called Project Eyeshine. It was the U.S. counter to German night optics, a weapon meant to flip the battlefield after dusk. The problem was logistics. The early sniper scope weighed over 30 pounds with a power pack the size of a car battery. Infantry refused to carry it. The manuals called it experimental and unproven, but Keene didn't follow manuals. He volunteered to test it, not because he believed in the technology, but because he hated dying in the dark. And so the same Americans who'd spent years whispering the night belongs to them found themselves fighting alongside a man who could see through it. He was the first proof that fear had a limit, and that technology, even improvised, could push it back. From that moment on, one myth began to die. Because if a single man could turn midnight into daylight, then the Germans no longer owned the night. Before Sergeant Keene ever lifted that strange glowing scope, another war had already been raging. Not in trenches or skies, but in laboratories. A secret technological race fought with glass, electrons, and fear. It began in 1940, when both Germany and the United States stumbled onto the same idea, that invisible light could be weaponized. The human eye saw only a fraction of the spectrum, but beyond red, in the infrared, lay a hidden world waiting to be revealed by science. For Germany, it became Project Vampire. Engineers at AEG and Zeiss developed the Zielgerät 1229, a bulky infrared scope mounted on the STG-44 rifle. It paired with a battery pack and an active infrared lamp that flooded the night with invisible light. To anyone wearing the scope, targets glowed like ghosts. To everyone else, it was total darkness. The Germans equipped select Panther tanks and sniper units with the system. It was heavy, primitive, and expensive. But it worked. Reports from the Eastern Front in 1943 describe Soviet patrols ambushed at night without warning. "They see in the dark," one survivor wrote. "It's not natural." The U.S. noticed. In 1941, the newly formed Office of Scientific Research and Development, OSRD, quietly authorized Project Eyeshine, an American attempt to catch up. The idea: create a man-portable infrared sniper sight. The early prototypes were crude. The image flickered, the range was short, and the power pack overheated after 20 minutes. But the engineers at RCA Laboratories and the Army's Signal Corps refused to stop. By 1943, the Americans had built the first operational sniper scope M1. It weighed 33 pounds, with a 20-pound backpack battery and a glass lens nearly 6 inches wide. The range, 70 to 100 yards. The whole system cost as much as 2 M1 carbines. The Army ordered 500 units for field testing, but the frontline commanders didn't want them. Too heavy, too fragile, too complicated. The crates sat in warehouses from Maryland to Dorset, labeled restricted optical equipment. Until one ended up in the back of a 2nd Armored Division supply truck headed for the Siegfried Line. No one remembered how it got there. Maybe it was misplaced, maybe reassigned. But by February 1945, it was in Keene's hands, along with a small stack of typed instructions, half torn, and a note that read, "Return after trial." The system wasn't ready for war. The battery cables cracked in the cold. The scope's tube flickered when damp. And yet, the potential was undeniable. The Americans had something the Germans didn't: scale. While the Reich's engineers hand-built their Vampire units by the dozen, the U.S. could mass-produce hundreds overnight. In total, $57 million, over $900 million today, would be spent on infrared optics by war's end. It was the kind of investment only an industrial giant could afford, an entire invisible arsenal waiting for its first real test. And that test came not from a laboratory, but from a mud-soaked forest, in the hands of a sniper who believed more in instinct than in science. While the rest of the army slept blind, Daniel Keene saw the future glowing green. The race for the night was over. The Americans had quietly won it, one ghostly flash at a time. When the Manhattan Project was turning atoms into fire, another smaller project was burning through money to turn darkness into light. The U.S. called it Project Eyeshine. Its goal sounded simple. Let a soldier see what the human eye could not. But the math behind it was staggering. The total budget, $57 million, a figure so high that Congress classified it under special optical research. More than 6,000 engineers and technicians across 8 states worked on it in secret. The raw materials included 3 tons of precision ground glass per 100 scopes, vacuum tubes that shattered under temperature swings, and lenses that fogged if a man breathed too close. Each sniper scope unit cost $1,700, the price of 2 jeeps or a year's pay for a captain. It was supposed to see 70 yards in pitch darkness, yet it weighed 33 pounds and required a 20-pound backpack battery. The sight itself used an infrared emitter that projected an invisible beam, a flashlight the enemy couldn't detect, while a photoelectric tube inside the lens converted that reflection into a ghostly green image. In theory, it was perfect. In practice, it was misery. The glass lenses froze in the cold, the cables cracked, the batteries died in rain. Soldiers had to carry a separate generator to recharge them, and the light had to be invisible yet powerful enough to bounce off a helmet 100 yards away. Early field tests in Louisiana proved one thing. The device worked only when nothing went wrong. But when it worked, even once, it changed everything. At Camp Evans, New Jersey, trials showed that a single sniper with the M1 sniper scope could eliminate 5 targets before any return fire. German observers reported seeing phantom shots in the dark, bullets without flash, sound without source. The first operational report from the 2nd Armored Division recorded a 9-to-1 kill ratio during night patrols after the scope was deployed. Night losses dropped by 60%. To military scientists, the results looked impossible. The math said it shouldn't work. Not with the weight, not with the weather, not with the power drain. But the field reports told a different story. Men who used it stopped dying in the dark. Every improvement, every ounce shaved, every new transistor welded, came at a cost. A single batch of infrared tubes required as much copper wiring as a tank radio. The Army imported special phosphor chemicals from Canada and silvered mirrors from Kodak. The irony was sharp. The most secret weapon of the infantry was built using the same technology as Hollywood cameras. And yet, every engineer who handled the prototypes knew what it meant. They weren't just making a new scope. They were giving man his first mechanical advantage over darkness itself. For 6 years, soldiers had fought the night with flares, tracers, and fear. Now, the battlefield was changing shape again, from sound and guesswork to light and precision. It had taken $57 million, 2 years of failure, and one fearless test under fire to prove that the impossible could glow. The Germans had built the first night vision rifle. The Americans had built the first night vision war. And somewhere in the black woods of Hürtgen, that war had just opened its eyes. February 20th, 1945, near Schmidt, in the southern reaches of the Hürtgen forest. Midnight. The rain had turned the earth to soup, and every foxhole filled like a drowning well. Sergeant Daniel Keene and his platoon huddled in the dark, 20 yards from a tree line that hid a German machine gun nest. The position had stopped their advance cold for 2 days. Every attempt to flank it ended in blood. At dusk, the captain ordered a night assault, a desperate move. "We go in quiet," he whispered. "No tracers, no flares. If they spot you, you're dead." Keene said nothing. He was checking cables, twisting them tight against the metal sockets of his scope. The power pack on his chest hummed faintly. His squad called it the coffin light. They didn't trust it. Nobody did. At 2300 hours, the rain eased to a mist. The Germans were singing somewhere beyond the trees, faint voices carried by wind. The platoon crawled forward, silent but blind. Then the night cracked. A burst of MG-42 fire ripped through the darkness, carving orange lines into mud. Screams followed. 2 men dropped instantly. The rest froze, couldn't see, couldn't shoot. Keene stayed on his knees, lifted the glowing scope to his eye. Through it, the world shimmered alive. The trees glowed faint green. The German position burned like a constellation, heat, light, and motion invisible to anyone else. He could see the flash of the gun, the loader's hands, the silhouettes of helmets bobbing behind logs. He didn't hesitate. 1 shot. The loader fell. 2 more. The gunner slumped over the barrel. The scope flickered. The power was dying. He slapped the side of the battery case and kept firing. Each burst found its mark. The captain shouted into the dark, "Keene, what the hell?" "Keep moving," Keene barked. "They can't see us." For 30 seconds it was chaos. Pure, one-sided chaos. Every muzzle flash the Americans saw, Keene had already shot. When the scope went black, the forest went silent. The platoon advanced, rifles ready, hearts pounding. They reached the enemy trench and found 4 dead Germans, their machine guns smoking, their eyes open to nothing. The captain knelt beside the gun, stared at the perfect bullet holes through the men's foreheads. "How'd you hit them? You can't see a damn thing." Keene just tapped the lens housing. "They glow," he said softly. Word spread before sunrise. The sniper who sees in the dark. Men came to his foxhole just to look at the scope, the eerie green flicker that turned fear into awe. The next night, his unit tried it again, advancing under total blackout. No flares, no moon, only Keene, crawling forward, scanning the void. Each time he fired, another unseen sentry fell. By dawn, they'd captured a ridgeline the division had failed to take for weeks. The report said it plainly. Night fighting advantage, decisive. For centuries, the night had belonged to superstition, to fear, to whoever was brave enough to walk into it. That night, it changed ownership, because for the first time in history, the darkness itself was under American control. And in the mud and the rain, a single shot had started a revolution that glowed green. Within days of that firefight near Schmidt, the rumor spread faster than orders. Units whispered about the sniper who killed by light no one could see. Commanders called it nonsense, until the numbers came in. In the week after Keene's first night engagement, the 2nd Armored Division's night casualty rate dropped by 60%. German counterattacks that usually carved through patrols suddenly failed before they started. The after-action reports sounded unreal. Enemy positions neutralized before contact. No muzzle flashes observed. The Army's analysts at SHAEF headquarters saw the pattern. In daylight, the kill ratio held steady. But after dark, where Americans used the sniper scope, it spiked, 9-1. The U.S. Army had accidentally discovered a new kind of psychological warfare. The Germans had ruled the night through discipline and fear. They moved quietly, shot briefly, vanished quickly. It made them ghosts in the dark. But now those ghosts were dying, without ever seeing what killed them. Survivors described green eyes watching through the rain, silent shots that left no flash. Panic replaced precision. Patrols refused to leave their bunkers after midnight. Commanders shortened shifts, burned more flares, and ordered fallback positions closer to light sources. Keene had turned a technological trick into a battlefield contagion. The Army tested his method officially. Engineers set up a sniper scope at a captured range outside Aachen. They asked him to demonstrate at night. He sighted 5 targets across the field, helmet silhouettes barely visible even to the testers. In 15 seconds, he hit all 5. The engineers measured his sight alignment. It was perfect, within a quarter inch of center mass. But when they handed the scope to another man, it didn't work. He missed every target. That's when they realized the secret wasn't the lens. It was the rhythm. Keene was compensating instinctively for the scope's infrared drift, correcting aim in real time, the way a jazz musician keeps time with sound instead of sheet music. They brought in other marksmen. None matched him, but every one of them felt the same thing. When the green light filled the scope, the fear vanished. It was the first recorded case of psychological inversion in modern warfare. When a weapon not only kills the enemy, but erases its user's fear. The U.S. Signal Corps immediately pushed for field trials. Within 3 months, Project Eyeshine prototypes were on ships to the Pacific bound for Okinawa. Germany, meanwhile, was collapsing. Its factories couldn't supply enough vampire scopes for its dwindling army. Fuel shortages crippled mobility. The Reich's night soldiers were reduced to retreating by flashlight. By spring, American officers described night operations as routine. Infantry, who once dreaded dusk, now volunteered for night patrols. The transformation was complete. The math of fear had flipped. Every weapon is born to solve a problem. But the sniper scope did something stranger. It changed behavior. It turned men who feared darkness into hunters who thrived in it. The night no longer belonged to discipline or doctrine. It belonged to whoever carried light invisible to the rest of the world. And in that invisible light, the Germans stopped being hunters. They became targets. 2 weeks after Hürtgen, Keene's rifle and scope were taken from his hands and shipped to Paris. His captain said it was an upgrade, but everyone knew the truth. The brass wanted to see the miracle for themselves. By the time it reached the test range in Versailles, the lens had already acquired a code name, Project Eyeshine. Engineers from the Signal Corps and scientists from RCA gathered to study it. The first thing they noticed wasn't the device itself, but the way it was modified. Keene had rewired the power lead, bypassed the voltage limiter, and replaced the cracked emitter housing with a cut piece of tin can. It was field engineering born from desperation, and it worked better than the factory model. One of the scientists muttered, "He made a better circuit than we did." That line ended up in the report. On the second night of testing, they invited Keene himself to demonstrate. He arrived filthy from the front, uniform torn, stubble on his face. The officers looked uncomfortable. They were used to lab coats, not mud-stained killers. They set up steel silhouette targets across the range 100 yards out, invisible in the moonless dark. The scientists powered up the scope. The green glow filled Keene's eyes. He adjusted the focus and fired 5 rounds in quick rhythm. Ping, 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 ping. Each hit dead center. Then they handed the rifle to a trained sniper. Same scope, same setup. He missed every shot. The engineers reviewed the scope's internal readings. Keene had been compensating for infrared lag, an invisible heat distortion that shifted targets slightly off-center. It wasn't something you could measure. You had to feel it. His instinct had outperformed their math. The project changed direction overnight. Instead of shelving the sniper scope as field-limited, the Army ordered a rapid refinement. A lighter lens, a smaller battery, a new training program. Keene's field notes became technical doctrine. The first line read, "Don't fight the lag, flow with it." By April 1945, Project Eyeshine became iScope M2. Over 500 units were shipped for combat testing, 50 to Europe, the rest to the Pacific. The technology that began in one muddy forest was now being deployed across 2 hemispheres. But the real impact wasn't the hardware, it was the mindset. Commanders began redesigning tactics for the night. Patrols moved with confidence after dusk. Convoys traveled without headlights, relying solely on infrared spotters. The phrase, "ghost vision," entered Army slang. One general wrote to the War Department, "Our soldiers are no longer afraid of the dark." It was more than morale. It was evolution. When the scientists packed up their notes and labeled the boxes restricted, they didn't realize they'd just built the blueprint for the next century of warfare. Because in Keene's trembling hands, a 30-pound prototype had proved that technology could bend human perception, and with it, the balance of fear. Project Eyeshine had started as science. It ended as revelation. The night would never be neutral again. March 1945. The Rhine River, west of Remagen. The Germans were in full retreat, but they fought for every bridge like it was Berlin itself. The U.S. engineers needed the river crossing intact. One wrong explosion, and the Allied push would stall for weeks. So, when night fell, the bridges became death traps lit by tracer fire. Keene's unit was ordered to cover the engineers during the crossing. He was issued one of the new M2 sniper scopes, the same technology he'd field-tested in the forest, now refined, smaller, deadlier. This one worked perfectly. The power pack was lighter, the focus cleaner, the range doubled. It was the culmination of everything Project Eyeshine had promised. The night before the operation, Keene checked his scope while sitting in the mud beside the riverbank. The lens glowed faint green, its hum like a heartbeat. Across the water, the Germans prepared demolition charges, confident that darkness was still their shield. They were wrong. At midnight, the engineers began crawling onto the bridge. German snipers opened fire from the opposite bank, their muzzle flashes sharp against the black. Keene adjusted his scope and saw something no one else could. The German scopes reflected faint halos of infrared light, invisible to the human eye but shining clear in his green glass world. He took aim and fired. One reflection vanished, then another, then a third. Each time, a sniper dropped without anyone knowing why. Within minutes, German counterfire stopped completely. The bridge went silent, except for the rumble of distant artillery and the low drone of American engines moving up the west bank. By dawn, the engineers had finished their work. The bridge stood, battered but alive. The first U.S. armor rolled across at sunrise, their treads shaking the planks that had survived the night. Afterward, a colonel approached Keene's position. "You do all that with one rifle?" he asked, half in disbelief. Keene just nodded, eyes still on the fading glow of his lens. "They couldn't see me," he said quietly, "but I could see them." That line ended up in every after-action report. It became the unofficial motto of America's new war in the dark. The sniper scope was no longer an experiment. It was doctrine. From that moment on, U.S. field manuals included a line under night engagement procedures. Infrared-equipped shooters may engage unseen targets with confidence. Darkness no longer offers concealment to the enemy. It was sterile language, hiding a seismic truth. That night at Remagen proved the final shift. The U.S. Army now owned the hours between sunset and dawn. German patrols reported ghost fire, attacks with no visible shooters. Their morale crumbled. One captured officer told interrogators, "It was like the night itself turned against us." He wasn't wrong. The war had entered its final months, but its future had already been written, in light the enemy could not see. When the last bridge across the Rhine fell into Allied hands, the commanders called it the victory that broke the Reich. But for the men who fought there, especially those who watched through green light, it was something deeper. It was the moment they realized that war no longer depended on the sun. The battlefield had evolved beyond human eyes, and in that evolution, Sergeant Daniel Keene's strange glowing scope had become the first true weapon of the new age, the one that made darkness a tool instead of a tomb. When the fighting finally stopped and Germany was carved open by surrender, the official reports buried Keene's name beneath acronyms and numbers. Infrared Rifle Sight, M2. Operational effectiveness, proven. Recommended for expansion. The memos spoke of tactical advantage, enhanced morale, night combat capability. But none mentioned the man who had first shouldered 30 pounds of cables and glass in a rain-soaked forest and proved it could kill in silence. Keene never gave an interview. There was no newspaper headline, no medal pinned to his chest. His invention was too secret, his mission too quiet. He went home to Indiana, a soldier with a classified story he could never tell. But inside the army, his legend spread the way soldiers spread all legends. In bars, in barracks, in whispers. They said there was once a sniper who saw in the dark, a man who made the night glow green. To historians, his contribution reads like a footnote. But its echo runs through every generation that came after. The Vietnam jungle ambushes lit by starlight scopes. The grainy green screens of Desert Storm. The helmet-mounted NVGs that turned Baghdad nights into daylight. Every modern soldier who peers through that pale glow is following Keene's ghost. The Germans had once claimed that discipline made them masters of darkness, but Keene proved otherwise. The night doesn't belong to discipline. It belongs to whoever can see. And the United States, with its engineers, factories, and quiet men like him, had learned how to see everything. The weapon he tested wasn't just a piece of metal. It was a philosophy. The belief that technology could outthink fear, that visibility was power. His lens wasn't built for glory. It was built to remove uncertainty. In a war where hesitation meant death, Keene's experimental scope had turned hesitation into dominance. One officer wrote years later, "He changed how soldiers sleep. He took the night away from the enemy." The war had started in shadow, in blitzkrieg raids, midnight bombings, and cities blacked out under fear. It ended in light. Searchlights over Berlin, flares over Tokyo, and 1,000 American rifles ready to fire in the dark. Keene didn't just survive the night. He changed what night meant. When his file was finally declassified decades later, the summary was brutally short. Demonstrated untested infrared sight in combat. Effective. No further record. But that line was history condensed. Because after February 1945, the world never fought blind again. He didn't invent night vision. He proved it. And in doing so, he gave modern warfare its most terrifying advantage. The ability to see before being seen. He wasn't famous. He wasn't celebrated. But in every green glow that still flickers across every battlefield in the world, his legacy endures. Daniel Keene didn't win the war. He just made sure that from then on, America never had to fear the dark. After the war, Keene faded into the quiet hum of post-war America. No parades, no speeches, just another veteran in a country that had moved from ration cards to neon signs. He took a job at a machine shop in Ohio, building parts for tractors, simple, heavy things made for daylight. When neighbors asked about the war, he said, "I was just infantry." He never mentioned the scope, the glow, or the night that remembered him. But history doesn't stay buried. In 1950, when the Korean War erupted, the Army dusted off Project Eyeshine. The M3 sniper scope, sleeker, lighter, deadlier, was rushed to the front. For the first time, American soldiers fought night battles on their own terms. Patrols reported ambushing enemy columns in total darkness, cutting through the black with precision fire. Every green lens in Korea was a descendant of Keene's field test. By Vietnam, night vision was no longer experimental. It was standard. Helicopter pilots, snipers, and even tank crews lived inside that same ghostly hue that had once flickered through Keene's rifle. In one report from 1968, a soldier wrote, "It feels like God turned on the lights for us." That light was born in a forest near Hürtgen. The irony was almost poetic. The man who'd seen through darkness spent the rest of his life living in its shadow. He died in 1962, anonymous, his story still classified. It wasn't until the 1980s that historians pieced it together from lab notes and combat diaries. Even then, his name appeared only once. In a faded typewritten memo, subject demonstrated prototype infrared scope with remarkable field results. The green glow that defines modern war, the filtered vision of every night raid, every drone feed, every reconnaissance mission, began with that remarkable field result. It's easy now to think of technology as inevitable. Progress is automatic. But it never is. Every leap forward begins with one person who refuses to stop at impossible. In Keene's case, it was one man, one rifle, and one flash no one saw. The war he fought ended 80 years ago, but his invention never did. Every battlefield since carries a piece of it. A soft hum, a phosphor glow, a promise that darkness no longer belongs to anyone. Because in that winter of 1945, Sergeant Daniel Keene didn't just pull a trigger. He pulled the future into focus. And long after he was gone, the world kept staring back through his lens.